Hey everyone, welcome to the Bishop's interview. I am Nathan Hinckley, and this is kind of new for me to be broadcasting live during the day. So I was interested to see if we'll have some people join. It looks like we've got a few already on with us. So thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about this guest that I have. I'm going to bring her on in just a second, but let me just say that one of the gifts of the deconstruction has been meeting a lot of wonderful, just great people, and I think you're going to feel the same way if after I introduce you here. Let me go ahead and bring her in. Her name is Cindy Bell. Cindy, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
I am great. So, welcome to the Bishop's interview. I think after this time together, I may want to rename my podcast again. I'm not so sure that
Oh, really?
the Bishop's office is going to be the most popular place, but we'll see how it goes. So, how you doing, Cindy?
Doing great, thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, where are you living?
We are in Naples, Florida.
All right. So you're not getting any of this nasty weather then, are you?
I am not, no.
All right. Well,
Thankfully.
we've got iced over roads. We got schools shut down. We've got all kinds of fun stuff. Hopefully I keep power and everything throughout this broadcast. So
Yeah, that's no fun. I mean, I grew up in New Hampshire, so I know all about that. And then I lived several years in Alaska. So, but now we're here in Southwest Florida.
Well, if you've been in Alaska, I'm not going to get any sympathy for our inch of snow on the road, am I?
No, sorry, not much. Not much, really.
All right. Well, so we do have some people joining us, and I'll just say, as we go throughout this time, you're more than welcome to put some questions there. If we have time at the end, we can also maybe do some questions and answers, and possibly even bring you into the studio if that's something you'd want to do. But before we get started, Cindy, let me just say that I appreciate being your Facebook friend. As soon as we became friends, I said, this lady looks famous. That was my first thought. So go ahead and clear up the rumor in my head. Are you famous, Cindy?
Yes, I am absolutely famous.
Well, you have that star quality about you.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
But regarding your Facebook page, so I did a little stalking before the show here. I wanted to bring up a couple things and just kind of see what you think about it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here was the first one that I liked. So I've got my coffee mug here, and it says, "If you blow on your wine, if you blow on your wine in a Zoom meeting, they will think it's coffee." So, how am I doing here?
You're doing really great. Is that a cabinet? Is that a cab, or is that a Pinot Grigio? What do you have there?
Well, actually, I have this mango mimosa.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's entry level. Good job. Yeah.
Hey, I am a lightweight.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought that was pretty cute.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Let's see what else we have here. All right. When two people argue online, I believe the one who spells correctly. Now, let me just say that. Let me just say that one kind of stepped on my toes a little bit.
You felt that?
Yeah, that one really hits home. So I was kind of offended by that particular one.
Okay. Yeah, of course you were. Well, once you're out of the church for a few more years, you won't be offended by that much anymore.
All right, let's see what else we have here. I like this one. So apparently you asked ChatGPT to roast you. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
All right. Can I read what ChatGPT said, or do you want to give us some backstory to this?
I'll give you a little backstory. I've trained my Chat GPT because I use it a lot. So it knows me. And, it's creepy. It's creepy, right? AI is just creepy. But other people have tried this and they said, well, I only got one sentence and it had nothing to do with me. I'm like, yeah, you have to train your robot, right?
Okay.
So mine knows me very well. And this is spot on.
Okay, here, I'm going to read it. Cindy Bell, the
Okay.
human tornado of ambition who makes the rest of us wonder if we're even trying at life. Publisher, entrepreneur, coach, podcaster, realtor, mom of 5, GG of 4. Honestly, we're starting to think you just collect job titles to feel alive.
Oh, gosh.
Do you even like alive. Free time? Or does the thought of sitting still give you the hives?
Kind of, yes.
I thought that was pretty good.
It's pretty good, and it's very long, and it goes on. It's, very self-deprecating, but it's funny. It is really funny. It made me laugh.
All right, I got one more here.
Okay.
And it was just this one. I noticed this was on New Year's Eve. Do I take this as maybe a resolution of some sort?
Yeah, it's going to be my word for 2025, but I don't like to be like Captain Obvious. My word for 2025 is, so I just, just a little tease, just put the word out, which triggered some people, which is so funny because, these hard charging entrepreneur types, no offense to anybody, but, people who are just like, they wake up every day and they just can't wait to get to work and they're, excelling at everything. They were triggered by that.
Huh.
And I'm just like, look, or maybe it was the other post I made that went along with it. It was about hustle culture is dead.
I noticed that one too. Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm 58. I've done my time in hustle culture. I still work. I still have a job, but I'm just getting to the point in life where I'm like, it feels good to be a little more lazy.
Well, your Chat GPT doesn't think you are.
No, it does not. Not at all.
Well, let me just say you look great. You definitely have that star quality. So we're going to get into a little bit more of Mormonism and some of the ways that it shaped your life. It is interesting, and you pointed this out while we were chatting before going live, that unlike me and my family, this is all super fresh, like a year, year and a half, 2 years fresh. And you had pointed out that, you kind of went through this a good many years ago. So I think it'll be interesting for me and for our viewers and for everyone that will watch this later, just to kind of see how Mormonism affected you early in life and kind of how you've gotten to where you are now.
Okay.
So we do have a bit of an outline, but why don't you just start with some of your background, how you were raised, kind of the family dynamic. I believe you had said you were raised, born in the Covenant. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
And where was that?
So I'm born and raised in New Hampshire and born in 1966. And at that time, there were not a lot of Mormons in that part of the country. And so, my parents were members. My mom joined the church when I think she was 18. She went to BYU, which was very rare for anybody back east to go to BYU back then. And my dad joined the church when he was in his early 20s. They were going to the same ward, met each other, and they were kind of, people in the ward kind of did matchmaker and put them together. My grandfather at the time, he was the branch president because this little tiny ward was not even a ward, it was a branch. And so very few members, and my parents and grandparents were some of the original members of that branch. And, New Hampshire was pretty isolated from Salt Lake back then. There's no internet, all they had was phone. And I think the doctrine of Salt Lake changed a little and got watered down or edited a little bit by the time it reached places like northern New England back then, especially. And so I probably grew up with a doctrine and a Mormon culture that was a little bit different, or a lot different from people who grew up in Utah and Idaho, for example.
In what ways do you think that it might have been kind of different or whatever from Salt
Well,
Lake?
they were all converts, right? So all these adults are brand new converts. And so who was teaching them doctrine? The missionaries, the 19-year-olds, right? So that's where they learned it from. And I'm sure they, went through, I'm sure they had handbooks. Of course they did, right? And I'm sure they had general authorities coming from Salt Lake to train people. But interestingly enough, the leader of that branch, then ward, was a man and his family. He was from Utah, moved to New England, was inactive. He was an inactive member. But then when the church started there, he decided he was going to become active again because he saw the opportunity to sort of take over, because
Okay.
he knew church. So he became like the head guy in that little area. This is the man who baptized my mom, because my mom was best friends with one of his daughters.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell a really personal story. He was inappropriate with my mother when she was a teenager for many years. And then he baptized her when she was 18. So how messed up is that?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was inappropriate with her, and then he becomes her spiritual authority, of course.
Okay.
And then he was one of the ones that was the matchmaker with her and my dad. And then when they got married, he was still their spiritual authority. And so it was this very bizarre dynamic
Oh wow.
of a man like that sort of controlling that ward for many, many years.
And did that ever come to light of what he had done, or?
No, I don't think he was ever confronted. No, he was never confronted. And then, but I always knew something was off with this guy. My mom kind of told us the story in bits and pieces as we got older. So I didn't like him. I always felt like, when I was growing up, he kind of looked at me like one of his favorites. He was just, he had that creepy vibe, the cringe vibe with him. But he was considered to be the top Mormon theologian in that area. So you didn't question him. But when I went to BYU, he had moved back to Utah. He was living there with his kids and his grandkids, and they invited me over to his house. And it was the most awkward thing ever, because I knew this man had never been confronted. He'd never had to pay for what he did in any way, shape, or form. He was still a bigwig in the church. And we're all carrying this little family secret, like, we can't confront the guy. It was just weird. It was weird. Yeah.
So I noticed in your outline, this type of thing comes up multiple times, and that's so unfortunate. I know that our church isn't totally unique in this, but to say that it's not a very big problem would be severely understating it.
Yeah, it's definitely not unique. I mean, all you have to do is scroll through YouTube and look at the Daystar scandal that's going on right now with that whole ministry. It's huge. It's, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's a sexual scandal going on with them. Mega churches are, and huge pastors are falling all the time due to sexual sin. I mean, it's just pretty common.
Okay, so so you remember when you were young? So did you know some of those things when you were young, as far as your with that individual?
I think so. I was kind of clued in. I mean, there were hints here and there. I knew my mom did not really care for him, but she kind of had to pretend she did.
Okay.
So my dad knew about it, but my dad really wasn't protective of her in any way. He was buddy with this guy. So a lot of really weird boundaries. That's one thing I will say about the ward I grew up in. I think there was just a lack of boundaries in so many areas. And part of that's an LDS thing, but also part of it is a cultural and area thing, being so far away from church headquarters at that time. So I think it's kind of a combination of both. But there were more than one creepy men in our ward. Like, a lot of men wanted to hug and say inappropriate things. So Yeah, we grew up with a lot of that. I grew up with a sense, ever since I was very, very little, a sense, and I couldn't articulate it like this at the time, but looking back, I would say it was a sense of feeling like my body was not my own. I didn't really own this, because when you grow up in this patriarchal culture, knowing that since you're a girl, you're never going to hold the priesthood. I mean, two things I wanted to do so bad when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I wanted to be a Cub Scout, and I wanted to pass the sacrament. Like, so bad. And I remember I asked somebody about it. I'm like, well, when am I going to be able to pass the sacrament? I was probably 4. And they just looked at me like, you're never going to pass the sacrament. And you can't be a Cub Scout. I was so pissed. I'm like, what? And I remember being that young, just like blown away, finding out that I could not be a Cub Scout and I could not pass the sacrament. So at that point, I knew I am less than. And then when I started to learn about, the eternal plan for me was basically to be a polygamous wife. Basically, let's be honest. You get married in the temple, that if you make it to the celestial kingdom, your lot is going to be, if you're a woman, you're probably going to be one of many wives. And so when that realization really sunk in, it was just like this overwhelming feeling of powerlessness. And then add to it, the bishop or even one of his counselors could come pull you out of class at any time and tell you that you had to submit to an interview. And they could just say, oh, I heard this about you, so we need to bring you in and talk to you, worthiness interviews. So I felt like I was always at the beck and call, I guess you could say, of these priesthood holders in charge, and they had access to me, and they could call me into their office at any time and interview me and ask me anything they wanted to.
Okay.
And I had to answer to that.
Yes, you are correct. That is the way the church is set up. I don't like that view. I'm gonna go back to this view. I'm too big there. That's the way the church is set up. As a fairly recent bishop, I know that I was supposed to see the youth at least twice a year, and that's not even counting, like temple recommends or whatever. That would just be like checking in on them or whatever. This
didn't feel like that checking in to me, especially since I was a girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, looking back, I have 4 daughters. And my kids were not raised in the LDS church, but that's a whole nother story. But if any pastor, any man in, spiritual leader ever brought one of my girls behind closed the doors, just him and her, number one, that would be a huge problem. Then if he started to ask her highly inappropriate, sexual, detailed questions, I would light that dude up so fast. And then I would call the police. No question.
I love hearing that now. And I'm so ashamed that I didn't have that mindset before. And I'm not trying to gloss over the fact that was oftentimes my intention is, just checking in. But right. You are absolutely right that part of checking in as a Mormon bishop is asking about, do you live the law of chastity? And on more than one occasion, I have had young people say, what's that? And my easiest way that I remember explaining it was saying, well, we're taught that we need to keep our bodies clean and pure, and we shouldn't think things, bad things, and kind of beat around the bush a little bit. But we were also counseled by our stake leaders to not beat around the bush and to be specific and direct. And there was times that I mentioned things that the other person, the youth, would say, well, I don't know what that is.
Right.
And you wouldn't have to use your imagination too much to figure out what some of those things would be. So, you're describing how you kind of felt less than as a youngster. You wasn't going to be able to do some things that you wanted to do, and you kind of thought that your ultimate goal was just simply to be one of many wives. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, let's be fair. We were never taught that directly.
Right.
Now, some of our Sunday school teachers and mutual teachers, they would go off on tangents pretty regularly and insert their own interpretation of Mormon doctrine in there because we were like, just off the radar. But so we did hear a lot of weird doctrine once in a while, but we knew that polygamy was going to be practiced in the celestial kingdom. We all just knew that. And it's funny because as I engage online, especially TikTok, with younger Mormons, they're like, we were never taught that. Don't stop lying. They'll accuse you of lying. Like, stop lying. They'll accuse me of lying of the temple ceremony, the endowment ceremony. That doesn't happen. You're such a liar. Well, the reality is back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we were definitely taught these things. If not directly, we caught it very indirectly. Like, we understood we were going to be living polygamy in a celestial kingdom.
Right.
And so I was like, I don't even want to go to the celestial kingdom. I mean, I did, but I didn't. I think I put this in my outline. I wanted to be good so bad. I wanted to want to be good, but it was so fun being bad. Like, it was so easy to be bad. So I was one of these Mormon teenagers who I tried to fit in. I tried to be spiritual. There's just something about me that just was a little too edgy. I couldn't quite get the testimony right. I couldn't quite get there. I was just like, this is just, I hate it, but I want to fit in, especially when I went to BYU. I totally fit in. I loved BYU. I just got into that so much, and I can go into that later. But when I was a teenager, I was pretty rebellious. My parents had gotten divorced when I was 14, 15. And so that really shook up my foundation. So on top of all of these feelings that I had growing up, younger than in my teen years, of feeling like not enough and like I'm always in trouble and I'm never going to be this. I felt like I was always in trouble and God was always mad at me constantly. Those were constant themes throughout my childhood. I had nightmares constantly of the second coming. And I've talked to other people that experienced the same thing because we would hear all the time about on the day that Christ returns, you're going to be burnt as stubble. If you're not burnt as stubble, that stuck with me. And I would have this dream over and over and over again that I'd be looking at the horizon and Christ's face would come up and he was coming. And it was not a joyful thing. It was like super scary. Completely traumatized me because I had this recurring dream all throughout my younger years. It's like, and I knew I'm screwed. Like, I'm just not going to make it. And, so I had this internal conflict all the time of wanting to be good, but really wanting to be bad. And there was this conflict and this tension between those two things. So I was like pretty rebellious in high school. I would go to parties. And so I'm the Mormon girl at the parties. All the other Mormon kids from church, they were not partying. Like me and one kid, he was the bishop's son, one of the bishop's sons. We got in a lot of trouble together. We would party together all the time, but he was the only one. And then after we got in really big trouble one weekend at a big party, the bishop called us up and said, I need you to both give sacrament meeting talks this next Monday on standards. And so we were dying. Like, we thought it was hysterical, but at the same time, we were really afraid. So we both prepared the most lovely, virtuous, beautiful spiritual talks that you can imagine. I mean, we put all the right scriptures in there. We, shed some tears. We were very contrite and very repentant. We gave beautiful talks. But then I guarantee you within weeks we were out partying again.
You were sincere though during that talk? You weren't just putting on, or were you?
I was sincere because, like I said, I really wanted to be good. So I felt at the moment like I just wanted to do it right. But then I was angry at myself because I really wasn't living authentically at all. And of course, we didn't know what that meant back then, living authentically, right? I just knew that I had this conflict going on, that I couldn't stand being a member of the church. But at the same time, I felt in some sense deeply grateful that I was born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the one true church on the face of the earth. I had that gratitude, but at the same time hated it.
Yeah.
And so I was partying, and I was the one teenager that always got called in. Like, I was on every bishop's radar. And I don't know why we had so many bishops. Like, we must have turned, like, because usually the bishop has his calling for what? How many years?
5 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Usually
So
around 5.
during my teen years, I remember at least 3 bishops that I had interviews with. And so I'm not sure why the turnover was so, why that happened so frequently. But so I was interviewed by several bishops, and I think that they all were really good men like you. You didn't have a heart to go in there and tear teenage kids' psyches apart. That's not what you were about. But you were just doing what you thought you were supposed to do, right?
Right.
But these guys, I mean, I'd go into their office. The outside door would shut, close. The inside door would shut, close. It's just me and him. I'm 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, alone with a 45-year-old man who's known me since I was a very little girl, asking me highly inappropriate questions. Now, I don't know how crazy you got on your line of questioning, but I mean, it was always the same. So, and they'd start like this.
You gotta do the rock. Okay.
Yeah. And he'd just look at me and stare for a while. And then he'd get very serious and lean forward. Sister Buswell, because that was my maiden name, Cindy Buswell. You know why you were called in here today, right? Yeah. Of course, the tears start. And, there's always this preamble of Heavenly Father is very sad. And I have to ask you some very important questions because, Heavenly Father needs to know. And I'm like, and of course, I knew that if I lied to the bishop, Heavenly Father would give the bishop a revelation and tell him I was lying.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that if I told the truth, I was going to get in trouble.
Big trouble. So what'd you do?
So I waited every single time. I'm like, okay, which one do I want to do this time? Inevitably, I would usually tell the whole truth. And I just, felt so embarrassed and so ashamed. And I remember once, because it was always like, I didn't have anything huge to report, but when they go down, I don't know how much I can go into this, but when they go down the line, the questionings, they start with, did you kiss? How long did you kiss? Did you use your tongue? And and it gets progressively worse. Did he touch you on your chest? Was it on top of your shirt or below your shirt? Was it on top of your bra, beneath your bra? And I could see he was progressing. Did he touch you below the belt? Was it on top of your pants or beneath your pants? On top of your underwear or beneath your underwear? Did he? And I won't go into it, but it was a progressive questioning. And it was just like, I felt like, I had this sensation like I was being spiritually raped. I just felt like my soul coming out of me with every question. And usually I would tell the truth, and it wasn't like horrible, but I was making mistakes, the hazards of the horizontal. You don't want to get horizontal. You've heard that, the hazards of the horizontal?
I don't think I've heard that phrase, but
yeah. So, I was always in trouble, let's put it that way. But I never was forced to stop taking the sacrament. I never was excommunicated, never disfellowshipped. I was always given a break. Like, I seemed to catch a lot of breaks. And maybe they like to bring me back in as often as they did because I, gave them some material there. These guys.
Oh boy. So, those type of questions that I have heard that a lot, on top of clothes or under clothes. And, I've never asked that stuff. I mean, the most detailed we were told to do would be like with the young men, when was the last time you masturbated? That was about the most detailed question that we were told. Of course,
yeah.
I didn't know what to do if they would have said this morning or whatever. But, so, yeah,
I was never asked the M question.
Yeah.
Ever, because maybe back then they didn't think that something girls would do. I don't know. But thankfully, because I don't think I would have been like, what? So I lost my train of thought. I'm old, Nathan. I was going to
Oh
say
no!
something about
So
that, but
well, let me just say that people in the chat are loving you. There's 70 people on here.
oh my gosh, yeah, I can't see
We
it.
had
But
just to back up just a little bit. We had some people saying I can relate to recurring dreams, and you're making Dr. Blast laugh, really laugh. And Blackbirds talks about a lot of that there was a lot of fear about confessing sins. And so everyone is loving what you're saying here. So, anyways, it sounds like so. You said you had 3 different bishops. Would each of those bishops all ask those same probing questions?
pretty much, yeah, it was
Mm.
pretty standard. They all, they each had their different personality. One bishop, I'll just say his name's Bishop Cody. He was just such a beautiful person. He's a beautiful, gentle spirit, such a nice man, and I could tell it pained him so much to ask me those questions. So with him specifically, most of these bishops were just they were just trying their best, and I don't think that they were necessarily perverted, except one whose name I won't mention, but I think that they were just trying to do their job, and they were probably pretty uncomfortable too.
Mm.
But I have heard that nowadays those types of questions are not asked nearly as often. And that's why people look at me sometimes, younger people in the church, and say, that doesn't happen. I'm like, yeah, it happened all the time. And it even happened, it continued to happen when I was at BYU. So it was definitely a thing.
Oh yeah, I just did a bishop's interview or whatever you call it, round table the other day with 4 different bishops. And there was a story that came out that someone from the ward came to him because he had a counselor do an interview with someone, and that family came to him and said, "Do not ever let that counselor interview my daughter again. He was asking some very inappropriate questions." So it's still happening. It is definitely still happening.
I wish my parents had been aware. I'm sure they were aware I was being called in, but during that time, like my parents got divorced and my dad was pretty much kind of in la la land at this point, and my mom was doing her best just to survive, with 4 kids, being a single mom. So I think she was just kind of asleep at the wheel in terms of, she's trying to put food on the table. She's not really thinking about me being asked probing questions in the bishop's office. So I just don't think she was aware.
This person brings up a good question. Do you think that girls were singled out more than boys when it came to this type of thing, or do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the personality of the bishop. It depends on the personality of the girl. Like, I kind of had a reputation for being the wild one, so I think I was singled out in my ward. But I also knew that some really, some sweet girls who I never would have thought were doing anything wrong were called in as well. But I do think I remember when the boys received that pamphlet about their factory. Who wrote that? Was that
Boyd K. Packer? Yeah.
Boyd KK.
You got to keep the factory. Got to keep it working well and well lubed.
I remember. I remember they had pamphlets, I think, and I remember my brother, who's Dr. Blast in the chat. He'd walk around laughing about his pamphlet and talking about his factory. So I know the boys got these talks about their little factory and not to, don't touch it, don't unleash that beast, because then you'll go blind, or you're, whatever's going to happen to you. But I don't think the girls we weren't talked to in that way. We had like lots of morality talks, like in mutual, like lots of very heavy conversations about things none of us wanted to talk about. So we had some kind of weird leaders in mutual, like overly spiritual Molly Mormon types, who would try to give us these very serious talks on morality and purity, and we'd all be sitting there like, yeah, let's move on. But just like, they're crying, they're bearing their testimony about one mistake they made and it changed their whole lives. And, so that heaviness, these types of talks and lectures we would get all the time as girls, I think it wasn't really in graphic detail like the boys were. But we definitely were told over and over and over again, you know, keep everything buckled up.
Yeah.
Chastity belt, that whole joke. Don't.
So a couple things on that. Songs in our chat brings up the fact with the motto. Did you guys have to recite a young women's motto every week? I know that's something that they have. My wife talks about doing that a lot.
What was that? Yeah, what was that
like
thing that we had? It was
we are daughters of God who love us, and we love Him, and we will stand as witnesses in all times and all that kind of stuff. Interesting thing about that is the new motto says, and we will strive to qualify for God's love or whatever. And it's like, oh, we have to qualify for that? That seems weird. But to finish that thought, no, there was not a young men's motto like that, songs that we had to recite. But she points out that it said that it included being virtuous, being virtuous in that motto. So we're all the time bringing that up.
I remember we had like a cloth. What was it called? And we earned these little sticky
little medallion things or
whatever.
Yeah,
and we stuck them on. And mine was very sparse because I just didn't earn things very well. Yeah, the virtuous thing, that's a buzzword that we heard all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the 13th article of faith, right? This, we believe in being, it's all about chaste and
honest, true, chaste,
right?
for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you one more thing that just comes to mind. I remember a terrible object lesson about, I've seen it different ways, but like passing a cake around and everyone takes a bite or something, but it's basically supposed to be like, now would you want this, when everyone's already had a bite? Or did you have those kind of terrible object lessons?
We did. And they used, I remember using a cupcake, chewed gum was a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything like that you could eat. I do remember sitting there and we'd have to pass it along, and the lesson was, you're going to be like a used, dirty piece of gum on the bottom of some boy's shoe, and when he picks you up and looks at you, you are definitely not material for an eternal companion because you've been chewed up and walked on. And yeah, that'll mess with you.
When I read your outline, that's what I'm seeing. You're kind of describing that you just felt like you say you were trapped in a sense, and that you were just kind of broken when it comes to this, because you wanted to be good, but it was too easy to be bad, and these kinds of things. So yeah, I think we can relate, and we kind of feel for you there. So do you want to keep going on the next thing that sort of happened in your youth that really kind of changed everything regarding to your family?
Yeah. You talking about my parents' divorce?
Yeah.
Or no? Yeah. So yes, my dad, like, they were both my parents very active members. Our family was very active in the ward. I mean, we were the musical family. My dad was a beautiful opera singer, and they even flew him out to Salt Lake. He sang it at what's that called? I can't remember. Remember the spoken word, that program?
Yeah.
He was a soloist for them several times. He sang in my mom sang in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir way back in the day. My dad was a soloist for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. They'd fly him out a lot. So he was very well known in musical circles within the church. Like, he was very much respected in that way. But he had an affair when I was, I think, 14, maybe 15. And my dad and I were very close. And so I spent one summer with him because I'd gotten in trouble, stayed over at some boy's house with a bunch of other friends. So my punishment was I was grounded for the entire summer, which meant that I could only hang out with my dad for some reason. Like, I was tied to his hip for this whole summer. That was the summer he started having this affair. And he very wrongly made me his confidant. And he told me all about it. So I had all this knowledge of my dad's affair. And And being brought up in the church, knowing that families are forever, and if your parents get divorced, your family's not forever. And so that foundation, even though I didn't really believe everything, I had that foundational knowledge that, well, at least I have my family, and if this is true, we will be together forever. But when that happened, that really destroyed all of that for me. And so I felt this weird sense of, it was very conflicting for me, because I wanted to be loyal to my dad and keep his secret, but I was keeping the secret from my mom. She didn't know. But the day she found out was huge. Like, she kind of ran away to her friend's house and no one could find her. I'm calling all her friends, Mom, where are you? Where are you? She just disappeared because she had found out. And my dad was acting crazy, like, just, ah. And so when she finally came back home, I had told her, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to show you something. So there was this big pile of love letters that so twisted. He kept in the basement in this one spot. And I said, Mom, I'm going to show you. Here's all the love letters. And the fact that me as a 14-year-old had all this information and was used in this way. I love my dad. He's gone now. He passed away in 2020. I love my dad. But he used me in this way as his, accessory to sin. And that really messed with me, because then, like, my trust in men was completely shattered. Just my whole foundation was just gone. And that's really probably the point where I started my rebellion, and the partying is just my way to cope. But then my dad was excommunicated. They got divorced. And my dad was also a teacher in our high school. And we had an open concept school. So I could hear my dad. He had a huge, loud voice. I could hear him all day, every day, but he wasn't living at home because they were divorced. It was just very traumatic. So that event really colored my impression, my feeling about the church as well, and it just made everything worse. And no one saw me as, oh, that's the girl who's really hurting. They saw me as, that's the rebellious girl.
Wow.
So I got no help from anybody. I was just sort of labeled, well, she's a bad kid. She's a bad girl. She's out partying. Oh, I just thought of this too. Can you still hear me, or am I?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. I was at a party once. I was probably in 11th grade, and a lady in our church was a member, and she was married to this one man. It was like her fourth marriage. And that man was at this teenage party. And he went home and told his wife, I saw Cindy Buswell at a party and she was drinking beer. How's that for your Mormonism? She called me up. I'm 16 years old. She called me on the phone and she proceeded to rip me a new one and blame me for being at this party and setting a horrible example for her grown-ass husband because I was drinking beer. And she shamed me over the phone, like, you should know better. Now my husband will never join the church because he saw you drinking.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, it's like layer upon layer upon layer of people, allowing people to shame me over and over and over again. And so that was just one more thing. It was like, oh, like, a 16-year-old is responsible for his grown man's eternal salvation because he saw me drinking a beer. Like, you know what I mean? So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, Cindy, regarding, the secret that your dad asked, that I'm so sorry for that. That is such a tough thing to expect a young kid. My youngest son is almost that age, and I just cannot imagine putting that kind of weight. So I'm so sorry to hear that. How long did you have to keep that secret?
It was only a few months.
Mm-hmm.
It was only a few months, but it really, looking back, it really did do a number on me. And thankfully, I've had so many years between then and now. I've had a lot of years of healing. I've had complicated relationships with men for many, many years. I didn't really get it right until, believe it or not, I was 50 years old. That's how long it took me. But looking back, I can have compassion on myself because of the things that I went through and, the things that I experienced at the hands of the church and the hands of my dad. And it just kind of all blended together, just this whole, perfect storm of things that happened to me that made me that way. But, thankfully there is healing, and deconstruction was super helpful.
Yeah. Well, we've already discussed a lot of this, but getting into the next part of your outline, you have standards, purity culture, and worthiness interviews. We have talked quite a bit about
Yeah.
maybe some of
Yeah.
those. Is there anything else along those lines that you think plays into your story?
I would just say it's one of those things that I was very keenly aware of my entire childhood, that there was these standards and I was never living up to them. I had moments where I'm like, I'm doing a really good job. Like, I am doing a great job. So my final bishop interview before I went to college was when I just went in and I'm like, I just got to tell him everything because I'm applying to BYU. And that's when I really decided I'm going to turn my life around. I'm going to be a good Mormon. This is a decision I'm making going forward. I'm going to go to BYU. So I
Mm-hmm.
got everything off my chest. I'm, in his office and I'm sobbing and I told him everything I'd ever done. And this was a great moment. He said to me right there on the spot, Cindy, I have the impression that God wants me to tell you, the Lord wants me to tell you, you are forgiven. No punishment. And I left that office on cloud nine because I thought, I'm white as snow. I've been
Right.
forgiven. This is so cool. I can move forward now I was very appreciative and grateful at that moment because I really felt like, oh my gosh, I've been given a second chance. So I did 1 year of a college locally, and then I applied to BYU and got in, and not really realizing it is hard to get into BYU Provo. And I can't, I couldn't believe I got in, and I'm just like, this is awesome. So I went to BYU. I had the best time. There's a little bit of adjustment at first. Did you go to BYU, Nathan?
No, I never went
No. Okay.
to any college, so I just
Okay.
started getting my hands dirty.
Okay. So went to BYU, completely different culture. Like if at BYU you're a student that's from east of the Mississippi, they would say that you were just sort of an anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
And people just love to talk to me. Oh, you're from New Hampshire? Oh my gosh. Well, what's your story? When did you join the church? I was born
Mm-hmm.
into it. So it was people really wanted to know a lot about that. It was interesting to people. Plus, I wasn't blonde. I didn't really fit the mold. So it was just different. But I found my niche and I really excelled there. I loved it.
So, before we get too far into the BYU stuff, can I back up just a little bit
Yeah.
with the standards and things? So,
Yeah.
I know I know many examples where someone has, say, showed up to a church dance and their skirt or whatever wasn't long enough, or their shorts or whatever,
Yeah.
and they would make them get down on their knees, and if whatever they were wearing didn't reach the floor, then they would have to go home and change or put something on. Was there any of those things where you felt like you were called out in front of other people for not
Oh yeah.
wearing?
Yes. I do remember a ruler or a yardstick coming out a couple times. We had Super Saturday dances. Did you guys have those?
Yeah.
We called them Super Saturday. Okay. And those were like once a month on a Saturday. And those were exciting because there was a whole stake. And, there were cute boys outside of the ward. The cute boys were in the stake, not the ward. So we love those dances. But yes, you had to, your skirt had to be a certain length. For me, it was interesting. I had larger breasts. And so some of my dresses were tight. And I would get in trouble just for my anatomy.
Mm.
Wearing the same thing somebody else had on, but because
It fit you a little.
anatomically,
Yeah.
it fit me a little different, I was like a slut or in trouble for exposing too much. I'm like, what do you want me to do? So things like that you absolutely cannot control, that's craziness. But I do remember a yardstick coming out. I remember Super Saturday dances. There was like the bouncers at the door, which is, the bishop and his counselors or whoever, stake president, whoever was in charge of that dance. And you had to have your form filled out. You had to have your, I don't know what that was called, worthiness interview before you could go to a dance.
I remember some sort of dance card or something that we would have.
I didn't have my clearance for this particular dance, and I was kept out of the dance for a long time. They literally rushed me to a first counselor or something and did an interview on the side with me and very reluctantly signed my form so I could enter the dance. It was like craziness. So that kind of like expectation, like just weird things like that. Like you have to sign a form before you can go to a dance, or your skirt has to be a certain length, or your dress can't be too tight. Just really the least important of anything you can possibly imagine was the standard for entrance.
So unfortunately, this type of thinking continues in the church. I'm going to share my screen real quick. This is a picture of my wife, and this dress, you would not believe the firestorm that it started. We were off at a convention in Atlanta, and I was like, "Wear that black dress," and she did, and I posted about it, and a loved one, I won't say who, responded, "What is happening to our family because of that dress?" And
because of her shoulders. That is
because of her
shoulder
shoulders.
porn.
Yeah,
that is shoulder porn, Nathan.
So it's not only in the youth, although I feel like probably that's who takes the brunt of this whole standards purity thing, but definitely even a 44, 45-year-old grown ass woman, like you said, can't even put on a nice sexy black dress to go out on the town without being shamed and talked about, and that is a problem.
That is a big problem, and she looks beautiful in it, obviously. And I've seen some of her posts where she seems ballsy. Wasn't she cutting the lawn in bikini?
She was, but it was kind of she doesn't typically do that, but I was mowing with my shirt off, and so she said, "Well, I'm going to go do that." And I can't remember. We made a big joke out of it. Scroll my Facebook for all of our viewers.
I remember seeing that, and I thought that is amazing. I would really like her. So
I told her after that that I'm going to start throwing Miracle Grow on the yard if she's going to mow it in a bikini.
Smart man. Yeah, that's so funny. But with a new garment change, from what I understand, the new garments might fit under that dress she had on.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that we were shamed and everything, and now all of a sudden she's perfectly close to being able to wear that. So, and then one other thing. Go ahead, Cindy.
No, I was just going to say, I have a lot of female Utah friends, Mormons, but there's something about the culture in Utah. I've seen a lot of them get away with tank tops, even sleeveless. Some of their outfits, they're obviously not wearing garments, yet these are 100% committed, devoted, lifelong members that they're never leaving. They totally believe in it. But for some reason, it's like the hot girl code. If they're really hot and very attractive, they can get away with that. And there's like this, no one calls them out on it. And I don't understand if that's a Utah thing. I mean, and they're pretty blatant about it too. Like they show up at events with fellow Mormons in their clothing that obviously they're not wearing their garments. So I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's a regional thing. I don't know.
So, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I definitely see so many times that, and you hate to be the underwear police, but at the same time, when we've been like called out, just like the picture I just showed or whatever, then it's like, well, and so I've said this for a while now, they just need to get rid of garments. Like all it does is breed this judgmental attitude in the church. Who's wearing them, who's not, to show up to the church to play basketball, church ball. I was the only one that would be wearing their garments. Everyone's on their sleeves. And I'm like, well, that's kind of what it says in the handbook. And I was bishop. I was reading this. I've still got that whole paragraph memorized, that you should not remove it for activities which might reasonably be done with the garment worn beneath the clothing and all this kind of stuff. But the other thought I had is recently, right before we quit attending church, the stake young men's or Young Women's Presidency, whoever it was saying they got the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. It's like this little, and it used to be, this thick, but now it's only this thick. And they're like, oh, isn't it so great? The church is, trusting us now to make our own decisions. And now we don't have this much, but we just have this much. And, and I'm like, yeah, I guess that's great. But why did we have to go through all this?
Right.
Just that whole idea of then it never mattered. It was always an arbitrary just rule from someone.
Yeah, when I saw the garment change, I'm not going to lie, there was a part of me that was like, really? Are you kidding me? No, they need to suffer just as much as we did.
Yes. Yes.
I even did a TikTok about the difference, the change in garments. Of course, I don't have garments anymore, but I put on like 2 white shirts. One was more like a tank top and the other one was more like, this. And I said, this is what the garments used to look like. This is what they look like now. So these are the clothes you can wear now. And that's not right. Like, I'm mad about it.
It's so funny because we sit here, and at least we do, my wife and I, and we're like, oh yeah, cool, they're going to change it. Now they don't. But then, it's like, well, no, they should have to do what we did and all that. So it's a constant circle of, seeing these new changes, but then wondering, well, then why was it ever that way to begin with? So.
Yeah. And, way back when the church was first started, I mean, didn't they have garments down to their ankles and to their wrists?
Yeah. And then one piece. And
yeah. Oh, I remember the one piecers. I didn't wear them, but I remember my parents' generation. But in what world did we actually think it was okay that a bunch of old dudes in Salt Lake got to tell us what kind of underwear we can wear?
Isn't that so weird? I mean, to put it that way, which is a perfectly reasonable way to put it, it's so obvious. But when you're in, it's...
And I've tried to explain that to people. When you're in it and that's all you don't question it. So I've had people who've never been in the church, they're like, how did you accept that? Like, you're an intelligent person. Like, but it's hard to explain because that's all and you just accept it as, oh, that's reality. That's the way it is. But truthfully, you boil it down, it's a bunch of old dudes telling us what to wear underneath our clothing.
Yeah.
Like, what? So
why don't we get into, you were heading towards BYU. You want to talk about some of your time there, and then I guess I think you met your husband there. Is that right?
Yeah, my first husband. Yes. So I loved BYU. It made me feel like safe because I knew what the rules are, and by then I knew how to play the rules, and I just felt like much more in control of my environment for some reason. I just felt like a different person there than I did growing up Mormon in New Hampshire. I don't really know how to explain that, but I just really loved my experience there, even though it was very, we had the honor code. We were, and people would tattle on each other a lot. So I don't know. I just had a lot of fun, and maybe because I was, dating and it was just fun. And, but yes, I, met my first husband when I was 19, married him when I was 20. And that's like, looking back, it's like, my youngest daughter's 19. She is nowhere near ready to be thinking about marriage. Like, it blows my mind. But that was the culture, I remember they gave some fireside at BYU, and the fireside was called Get Married Men. Get Married Men. And so all the guys went to this fireside. They came back on fire to find their wives.
Mm-hmm.
And all these engagements started happening immediately. And of course, we know what that's about. The church leadership does not want anyone fornicating while they're at BYU. But the reality is, lots of them do. Even back then, it was going on, but I didn't think it was going on because you just don't really realize it. But it was. So that was the culture. I mean, everyone got married pretty young.
Okay. And So before then, did you find yourself in trouble and back in the bishop's office much, or not so much at that point?
Not so much, because I was being a much better girl at that point. Still dating and, having makeout sessions, but nothing too terrible. But this one time, the bishop from our student ward called me up and said, or they arranged a bishop's interview for me, and I had no idea what it was about. So I just kind of went in blind. And he sat there at his desk and he looks at me, he goes, "For the life of me, I can't remember why I called you in here." And so I'm like, lightning bolts, God wanted me to come in. And he goes, "Do you have something you need to talk to me about?" And I don't know if he really knew and he was just trying to be manipulative. Like, I don't know what was going on with him. But then, of course, I'm like, okay, let me think. And I just vomited something out. It was that I made out with somebody. And then, this whole thing about, then the questioning started. But I was just so humiliated because I really liked this bishop. I wanted him to like me and kind of think I didn't want him to think I was a bad girl. But he was kind, but still it was that whole having to share personal information with a grown man I don't know behind closed doors. Like, that whole thing happened again. And so it was almost easier just to get married rather than deal with that kind of scrutiny and judgment.
Okay. So, yeah, I've definitely heard that type of, idea that doesn't, just get married, almost doesn't matter who or whatever.
Yeah. It's kind of scary. I did witness a lot of people meeting, and then within 4 weeks they're engaged, and then a month later they're married. And it's like, they did not know each other.
Yeah.
And I don't have any statistics on how long those marriages lasted. Well, I mean, I've kept in touch with some of them, and most of them have split up. So I don't know. It's just sad, because basically you get married to have sex. That is the reason these young kids are getting married.
Right.
Because they can't control themselves. So, I mean, I even heard leaders tell us, if you feel like you can't control yourselves, the Provo Temple is right up the road. You just go up there and you get married. For real. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Or what is it? They would. Is it true that people would go to like Vegas and get married and then get it annulled? Or is that just a rumor?
I heard that. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I definitely heard that. I didn't do that, but I definitely heard other people doing it.
And then I have a friend that's a non-member who has asked me multiple times. I guess this interview would be an appropriate place, but so this person has said, "Please tell me that soaking is not really a thing in Mormon culture." And I've said, "Look, I've heard the rumor 1,000 times, but I can't say that I know that it happens." What would you say about that?
Okay, honestly, I was floored when I heard what soaking was, because to my knowledge, it wasn't a thing when I was at BYU, but I'm sure it was, because now I'm hearing all these people talking about it and looking at me going, how could you not know what soaking was? But when it was described to me, I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. That's such a Mormon thing, that you can actually go to this place of cognitive dissonance and tell yourself that if you soak by the method, like, the guy goes under the bed and someone's pushing up underneath the bed, or someone's bouncing on the bed, right? But as long as you're not initiating any sort of rocking motion yourself, you're okay. You didn't do anything wrong, right?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, without going into, I don't want to get flagged on YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's definitely a thing now and has been a thing for a while.
Okay.
According to what I'm told.
Here was a comment. This is from a friend of mine, Ruth. She says, this is paraphrasing Kimball, 2 righteous people can make a marriage work. Just kind of say, that's almost saying, it doesn't matter if you're 2 righteous people, anybody, like, you don't have to worry about compatibility or anything like that.
Right.
So,
Right. As
That's
long as you're
ridiculous.
righteous enough. So of course, when your marriage isn't working, of course, the messaging there is you must not be righteous enough.
Yeah, which one
And
of you
then,
two is messing it up?
right. What kind of unresolved sins do you have in your life that you need to go repent of? You
Mm,
know?
yeah. Okay, well, we why don't we get into you had some situations to deal with your husband. Do you want to talk about that?
So yeah, I got married at age 20, and this is funny because while we were dating, I had glimpses. I kind of knew like this probably isn't the guy I should marry. And some of his roommates would tell me things like, yeah, he he's probably, he doesn't treat you that well, but I couldn't see it. Like he was very attractive. He was from California. He drove a red Corvette. Like he was just red Camaro. He was just like this. He's 4 years older than me. He was a returned missionary. But there's something about him that was just bad boy, a little bit bad boy compared to these Utah and Idaho boys. And so he was just attractive. And I liked him a lot. Right. So I wanted to marry him, but I wanted to wait a little while because there were red flags. So one red flag he said is if you gain more than 15 pounds after we get married, I will cheat on you.
Oh my.
He said that straight up.
Oh wow.
And I still married him.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And then at one point during our engagement, I said, can we please delay this wedding by about 6 months? I think we need more time to get to know each other. And he said, nope. If you don't marry me now, you don't marry me at all.
Mm.
So that was another red flag, obviously. It's like, it just goes to show, I look back and I'm like, what? I really had an undeveloped sense of who I was. Like my frontal lobe had not developed. I was 19, 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know who I was. I still was dealing with trauma from my childhood. I had so many unresolved issues. And then I do remember him making comments about other girls on campus, that he preferred the very, very tall, athletic with the long, lean, athletic legs. He would tell me this stuff over and over. So I'm trying to compare myself. I'm like, once again, here I am, not enough. I'm not enough. It's like the theme of my life, never good enough. And he also told me one time, he goes, Cindy, you're pretty, but you're not beautiful. And I was like, well, I would like my husband to think I'm beautiful. You just think I'm pretty, not beautiful? It's like, yeah, you're pretty, but you're not beautiful.
Mm.
And so I married him anyway. So, who's to blame here? But true to his word, he did in fact cheat on me. Ironically, I didn't gain 15 pounds. I probably lost 15 pounds before that happened.
Mm.
So, yeah, I just think that was going to be his path and his trajectory. And he had a porn problem and a masturbation problem. And of course, those are big no-nos for any girl who's looking at marrying a Mormon dude. You don't pick a guy with those problems. But he would tell me, he's like, oh, that won't be a problem once we get married. Because once we're having sex, I'm not going to have a porn problem. I'm not going to have a masturbation problem.
Right.
Yeah, that didn't go away.
Was he also just a member in good standing and he was a returned missionary?
He was a returned missionary, yes. He did not grow up LDS. He joined the church on his own when he was like 19. The missionaries knocked on his door. He thought it sounded like a good idea. And he joined. So
okay.
Then he did his mission, and then he came to BYU. Yeah.
And so what happened after you found out that he cheated on you?
Well, he was an Army officer. We were stationed in Panama, and I felt like, gosh, I can't, where am I going to go? Or fly home back to the States. So it was one of those, oh, this is a good story. Okay. He was when I finally found out, and I kind of knew this had happened, and I eventually pulled it out of him, and he admitted to it. He admitted to all the times and what happened. And so we're in Panama, and I said, well, we have to go talk to the bishop, because there were, American wards there. So we went and talked to this bishop that I'd never met before. And I went into this thing with the bishop thinking, oh, my husband's going to get in trouble. He's going to be admonished. He's going to be mentored. He's going to be on the path to, repentance. And this is all going to be better. No. You know what happened? The bishop listened to us and he nodded. He goes, well, this does happen a lot. This happens a lot. And then he turned to me. He goes, I'm going to give you a book. I need you to read it. Guess what the book was?
Miracle of Forgiveness.
Bingo.
Oh my gosh.
And he gave it to me. And there I am again. Like, oh, it's my fault. Got it. I've got to learn how to forgive. And once I learn how to forgive, then this will be all better. And it was just another like heap of shame on top of me, guilt, shame, the same old story. Here I was again. Oh, I guess it's my fault that my husband cheated. All right, let me figure this out. And by then I was just sort of like, I think I'd reached my point of just like, yeah, church isn't true. I want out. I'll get out, and it wasn't too long after that I just kind of was like, not for me.
Well, let me join songs and just saying, I'm so sorry, Cindy. I mean,
thank you.
It's, that's very sad. And yeah, lots of I'm so sorry, Cindy's.
It makes me feel bad in a way because I'm really not looking for sympathy. But then I look back on my life, I'm like, that's pretty shitty. Like that was some trauma, right?
Yeah, and then also songs says a horrible book. Yes,
horrible book.
I was
out of print.
Yeah, they have, and there's actually book burning parties I've heard about people doing of that particular book. I was told to read it right before my mission, for having a little too much fun with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, who's sitting right over here.
Hi, Amy.
So, all right. So you kind of eluded that. That kind of, did that start your doubts, or did that like kind of end had you had doubts about the church before this, or?
Yes, definitely. But I will say, truth be told, had my husband at the time said, I really want to be a good member of the church, I want to repair this, I want us to get really, really active, and we're going to do this thing, I would have done it. I would have stuck it out, because that's what deep down, even though I resented the church, I knew deep down in my, I felt like this must be the true church, because what else is there? If this isn't true, nothing's true. So and you know what? The truth is, if I had married some country boy from Pocatello, Idaho, who was this stalwart priesthood holder, Peter priesthood, I probably would have been living on a farm with 12 kids and just living the Mormon wife life.
Mm-hmm.
And sad to say, but I think that is true. I just wanted a man to knew what he believed in, and I wanted him to guide me and lead me. I just wanted that little idyllic sort of situation. But truthfully, thank goodness I didn't end up in a farm in Pocatello. No offense to anyone from Idaho, but I'm kind of grateful that I had that experience, because it caused me to grow and learn a lot. But it took me a long time to learn it, I will say.
So you talk about how most of your kind of finding out what we would now call the truth, about the church, was before the internet. And
yes.
I can definitely remember. So you mentioned in around 1995, 96 was when you resigned. And I'm thinking back to, I think we graduated high school in 97.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we didn't have, social media. We didn't have, all of the things that we have now for internet and things. So what ways did you kind of deconstruct and find out what we all, know, or what did you know then about the church and the truth claims, or was that not a big player in your story?
It was a big player. I think the bigger player was how I felt about myself in the church, and just knowing that I need to be out of this kind of craziness. But there were plenty of books back then about Mormonism, like especially Mormonism versus Christianity, and books that were showing the truth of Christianity versus the lie of Mormonism. There were so many books about that. And I had a lot of friends suddenly, as I was kind of starting to deconstruct, that were born again evangelical Christians who were coming up to me and saying, the Mormon church is a cult. You're going to hell because you believe in works instead of grace. And so I'm like, oh, well, okay, let me check this out. I don't want to go to hell. And that seemed plausible to me, that this other alternative like evangelical Christianity was actually the truth and Mormonism was the lie. So I started kind of diving into that, and like my Christian friends were saying, just read the Bible, read these verses, and so it made sense to me. And I started reading the Bible, and I'm like, how come I never heard that from the Bible? The Mormons believe in the Bible. I never heard this in my experience as a Mormon, like you're saved by grace, not by works. So I kind of took this hard right turn, but not really. I mean, it's sort of a little, maybe a smaller angle turn into Christianity. Looking back, it was basically I jumped from the frying pan into the fire, right?
Yeah.
I mean, same thing, different pew, basically. You're sitting in the same church, so to speak, but in a different pew. It's like the same thing. But these evangelicals were totally convinced that they had the truth and Mormons were living the lie. So it was a big thing in like the 80s and 90s. Sandra Tanner, her husband Gerald Tanner, they had Lighthouse Ministry, I believe it was called. They would send out this monthly newsletter. Somehow that was being sent to me. I started reading all these books on the evils of Mormonism, and I fell right into that. I'm like, it was just perfect timing. I'm like, oh, Mormonism is a cult. It's false doctrine. I'm going to become a Christian. And so I kind of just went from one to another. And coincidentally or not so coincidentally, at the same time, I got divorced and remarried. Divorced a Mormon, remarried a Christian, and kind of just adopted that whole evangelical mindset. And I got a lot of mileage out of that within the evangelical circles, because they loved having a good ex-Mormon in their congregation that they could call on, like, to speak. I was given a lot of speaking spots. I would talk about my life in Mormonism, and they ate that stuff up. So it's kind of like I knew exactly what to say. I knew what the talk was, So now I'm an evangelical Christian, and did that whole world for like 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And raised my kids like that. And so my identity was, I'm an ex-Mormon who's now a Christian. And that was my identity for a very long time. And then I had to deconstruct from that. And at this point right now, I'm still a believer but my theology is this: love people. Love. That's my theology. And I do want to believe in a God or a Jesus. I do. I don't know where you are at in your spiritual journey, but I mean, the idea of that makes sense to me. I do believe in a higher power. I do believe in a God. But I believe that our highest calling is to love each other.
Yes.
And not judge.
I would say that I am a member of your church then, because that is my feeling. I'm not to the point where I just say, no, I don't believe in anything. I'm more in the camp of, I don't believe in what most people consider, religion or, I don't believe that what we read in scripture, God told, people to kill each other, and, Nephi to do what he did and killing the firstborn, and just, I don't believe any of that stuff. But what you just described, I believe that he wants us to be good and to love each other. I could probably go on a little bit more about that, but I feel as you do. Let me say real quick, thanks to some super chat from Dave, and he's been in the chat a lot here. He says he's too sick for a witty comment, but here's money. But he also had said, oh, interesting, there are some core theological aspects that never made sense to me. I think he's talking about, Dave, are you talking about in Mormonism or in just more mainstream Christianity there? So we're getting close to I think the end of at least the outline here. We want to, if you're okay, Cindy, if people have any other questions for you, there was one question here. This person asked if the Mormon man divorced you because you stopped believing, and I think that was just simply he was cheating and was.
Yeah, and he really didn't believe in Mormonism himself.
Mm,
I mean, he was just. I divorced him.
okay.
Yeah, and ironically, he didn't want me to. He begged me not to, and um, I'm still friends with him today. And even more ironically, he's been attending the Mormon Church now for a couple of years, and I'm like, wow, things are weird. Life is weird. But I did divorce him. He was not living the pure Mormon life, you could say, at all.
Something that one of the people that I interviewed said, he said, his name was Nathan also, he's a previous bishop, and he said, I will always be some percent Mormon. He says, I don't know if that's just 1% or, and I kind of felt the same way. Like this has been such a huge part of my life that I don't know if I'll ever get to the point that I don't consider myself, at all Mormon. I mean, how do you feel about that when you?
Well, do you go back to Pioneer stock? Do you?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're a Hinckley. Duh. Okay. Yeah, you're a Hinckley. That's right. I don't have that. So I don't have these deep roots of Mormonism. However, I will say that being born and raised in the church, it does have a profound effect on you because that's the stuff that's in your core. Like that's who you are. You're so impressionable when you're young, and the things you're taught when you're really young, they stay with you for almost a lifetime. It's very hard to separate yourself from those core beliefs. So do I feel like I'll always be some part Mormon? Maybe. Culturally, familially. I mean, I still have cousins and aunt and uncle that are members, very, very strong members of the church, but my whole immediate family is out. They're not, they all left in one form or another. But yeah, part of my identity will always be there.
Okay. One question we have from Walking on Sunshine says, what were your biggest shelf breaks?
Polygamy.
Okay.
Huge. Polygamy was huge for me. When I was a teenage girl, I remember picking up a book somewhere and reading. I've been trying to figure out what book it was, but it was reading about all of Joseph Smith's wives. And I was like, what? It was just like mind blowing. So polygamy was a big one. Things like the word of wisdom, like really, when you get to heaven, Jesus is going to hug you and say, I'm so glad you didn't have coffee. Right? Have you seen that meme?
Yeah.
It's so funny. And
Yeah.
you think about these things, it's like, God does not care what temperature you drink your caffeine at.
Yes.
So stuff like that. And just, I would just say overall, the shaming and guilting that I experienced was just really too much to bear.
Mm. Okay. If there's any other comments, you guys are welcome to post them. If someone's really brave and wanted to come into the studio, I just posted the link. Ruth says, I don't have deep roots either, but being raised in it, it becomes part of you. Deconstruction is the tool used to separate those things, at least for me.
Yeah. Was Ruth just on your podcast?
Yeah, she's been on a couple times,
yeah.
and
okay.
we're working on something in the near future. So she has some really great blog posts and things.
Awesome.
Writer. So
very cool. Well, it's so weird because when I did make Deconstruction, it was in the late 90s, right? So long ago that when everyone started showing up on social media as ex-Mormon, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that so many years ago. I did that 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I felt like I really didn't have a story to share anymore because it happened to me so long ago, the deconstruction. And so I feel like, well, I can't really tell my story because it's old, but I'm starting to really come out and talk about it more. I talked about it a lot, but we didn't have social media back then.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, it's interesting to me how, yes, I deconstructed, but I kind of want to deconstruct again because I want to make content about it too. So yeah.
Let's see. Deanne says, am I glad to know others, or let's see. I'm glad to know others are going through the same things I'm trying to rebuild in a way that feels more authentic and beautiful. I do believe in God, and it's been a hard journey. I think that's one of the benefits of, at least, of doing this deconstruction with social media. I've met people like you, Cindy, and a lot of people in the chat. Every day I get a couple messages of someone that's either reaching out saying thanks. I had someone saying, hey, do you know anyone in this particular area? Because I would love to meet up with someone face to face.
Stories like yours, Nathan, I think are so important for people who just don't know where to turn or are feeling just extremely guilty about doubting. I mean, remember, you doubt your doubts, right? You're supposed to doubt your doubts. So anyone who doubts, it's, so when you're so brave, you and your family, just come out and talk about this, you're giving other people permission to do the same thing. You're not causing people to leave the church. You're giving people permission to actually speak their truth, because this kind of bottled up trauma that so many people have, and they're just trying to live this Stepford wife life, smiling and pretending everything's okay. You're giving people permission to just be honest, be authentic about their doubts and their questions and their concerns. So, you're so appreciated. Even though I've deconstructed, I look at you and your stuff, I'm like, wow, he's so brave.
I appreciate that. Important. Well, I do appreciate that. And I feel the same way about many people, including you, Cindy. You're very well-spoken and very, I think people are able to connect with what you're saying. And let's see, there was a couple other comments. Let's see. Oh, a couple thank you, Nathans. I appreciate that. We have one person that walked into the studio. Are you okay to take a question if we have one here, Cindy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. This is a friend I've got. His name's Dave. Diamond Dave. What's up?
What's going on? How are you doing? If I cough up a storm, I'm sorry for ruining your...
No worries. Dave, do you have a question for Cindy or myself?
Well, yeah, it was going to be a two-part thing. So the question I would say to Cindy is, I've been hearing a lot from other people, because I was a convert and then I left. And the church that I joined is kind of, was very different. And I've been hearing that based on the generation one is in, it's almost like joining or being a part of a different church, like entirely. Would you say that's true? And if so, is there maybe, I wouldn't say a designated timeline, but is there just a way to kind of go back and see all the church was like this for this generation, and then things changed around this year for the next generation? Because that's
such an interesting question, because I've actually thought about creating a physical timeline with these little bullet points on it, because things did change. I'm not exactly sure when, but I think the internet was a pivotal part of that change. But like I mentioned to Nathan, I get on TikTok or Instagram, and people are putting out ex-Mormon content, like, this is what happened in the temple when I went through, and you've got these younger church members saying that absolutely never happened. You are lying, because the temple ceremony changed in what, 91, 92, or what year was that? And
there's been so many.
I'm speaking specifically when they took away the reference to cutting
the blood oath,
the neck and the disemboweling yourself. And that absolutely happened. I remember it very clearly. Freaked me out. So I think that this younger generation, it's sort of like what they know has been whitewashed. Like, they didn't experience that, therefore it didn't really happen. And so with all the changes and the church trying to reinvent itself all the time, I think that they really believe that the church they're in right now is the way the church has always been. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I like to float around between different channels to get people's, kind of perspectives, because I come from a very unique background, which gets into the second point, because Nathan, you asked for my super chat, or the thing that you put out, to the theological aspects, it's both.
Okay.
Right, because I come from a Hindu background, and so while there are some similarities, things like forgiveness and some other things didn't quite line up. So when I just stopped going to church, I just reverted back to being Hindu.
Okay.
What made you join the Mormon Church coming from a Hindu background?
There's a lot of similarities. And they're very superficial, right? So when you, for instance, like if you remember that, I don't know if you have a picture of this, Nathan, but you have that little plan of salvation thing where you have like the primordial existence and all the way around.
Oh, so, I'm gonna have PTSD.
I'm sorry.
Remember that thing?
Yeah, but yeah, that. So it's like,
what was that called?
I think I think they call it the plan of salvation. At least that's what they. Yeah, and so like when I saw that, it's like, oh, okay, well, this looks like reincarnation to me because we existed in the primordial existence, and then we go through the veil of forgetfulness, and then now we're here, and then we end up in the celestial kingdoms, which are the Varnas, the castes, how close you are to God. You have the Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, which is Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati. It is also kind of works-based in a way, because I've even had people at my ward tell me, well, yes, we have faith and yes, we are forgiven, but we have to work to be closer to God. That is very, very important, I believe, in my faith. So there's other similarities too, but then it started to break. And then when I got my patriarchal blessing, I was having recurring dreams like you were having. And that's why I said I relate to the recurring dreams. So I got sustained to the Melchizedek priesthood. I was never ordained because I had recurring dreams where I would wake up in a cold sweat with like just thinking, this is treason. Like, this is wrong. I should not be doing this. And ever since then, I just quit going. So
interesting.
Dave, thanks for joining us in the
thanks
studio.
For having me, dude.
Yeah, we have a couple other questions. I'm going to
Have a good one.
All right, we'll talk to you in a sec.
Bye, Dave.
So one quick comment. I can't go without showing. This is from my wife. Your story, Cindy, is so important for women of all ages. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
And let me see. I think there was love both your warmth and honesty. Yes, I second that, especially from Cindy. Let's see. Women were also required to wear obedience to their husbands, to swear obedience. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So yes, when I was in the temple getting my endowments, my soon-to-be husband was there on the other side. And yeah, I remember having to make a covenant to obey my husband. And I remember I looked over at him and I went, and I almost refused to say the words, but then I'm like, I'm not going to cause a scene. Just mouth the words, just like lip sync the words. Yeah. And I agreed to it. And I thought, what in the world am I doing? Like, really? And then on top of that, did you go through when that was a thing?
No, I went through in 98.
Okay. So you missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talk about trauma after trauma after trauma. It's like, you can't make it up. I mean, that was highly traumatic.
Yeah. So if there's any other questions, feel free to get them in the chat. But I guess just my final question or thought would be, do you look back on your time in Mormonism fondly? Do you regret it? Do you wish it wouldn't happen? Are you thankful for it? Like, what's your takeaway from the many, many years that you spent as a devout Mormon?
There were some good times because in our ward, our family sat in this one pew right up at the front on the right. My grandparents sat right in front of us. My grandmother was the choir director and my whole family was very involved in everything that was going on. So as a young child, there were good memories of that. That was back when we went to church like all day long. well, we went for like 3 hours in the morning and we had to come back in the afternoon. So we would just kind of camp out and stay there all day. So I have fun memories of that when I was little. And I appreciate the opportunities that I had in the church that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. I got a great education at BYU. I don't regret that. I mean, sometimes, having to put BYU on an application or something, it's like, I want to say, disclaimer, I'm not a Mormon now, but I got a good education, met great people. So, and everything happens for a reason. You have to look at your life like that as you look back. You just have to say, this happened for a reason. This is why I am who I am today. And I love who I am today. And all of this comes with it. So yes, I have many regrets and things I wish had not happened to me and things I wish, honestly, I would have done differently myself, but it wasn't all bad.
Okay. And you tell us, you're currently happily married. Is that right?
Yes, I am. Yes. And to a man who really doesn't have much religious knowledge or care about that. He's a good person and the kindest non-Mormon, non-Christian man I've ever known. It seems like the ones who claim to be so religious are the ones with the deepest trauma and the most troubling issues going on in their lives. And we could spend another 2 hours talking about stuff like that. But
do you find yourself telling your husband about this Mormon stuff, and is he able to? In my experience, if you didn't live it, you really don't get like what we went through.
I don't think it even lands with him at all because he never even went to church, period, growing up. So this is so foreign to him. I think he just looks at me and kind of goes, "Wow," but I don't think he understands on any level. He's just supportive and he probably tries to understand, but I don't think, no. If you haven't lived it, it's really hard to relate to it, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. And let's see, you also have, is it 5 grown children?
Yes, I do. Yes. 5 grown children. None of them were raised LDS. None of them. And I think that's a good thing. I'm glad because they didn't have near the trauma that I experienced growing up. Even though my girls grew up in an evangelical Christian type of purity culture that we really didn't even go into, it was different, but still that purity culture really is there in almost every evangelical Christian denomination. That really kind of is a thing. And I think it depends on the church. I think it depends on the culture of that church. It just, depends. But, I've heard horrific stories about Christians, like, the Duggars, that family. I mean, that's some purity culture right there, to the point that those children are so repressed and oppressed that that stuff comes out sideways eventually,
Right. All right. Ruth says, if you don't live it, you don't grasp it at all, other than think we are all crazy. Well,
yeah,
that's probably true.
Yeah.
Cindy, I've thoroughly enjoyed this hour and a half to talk with you. I think I've even become friends with, I think he might be your brother.
He's my brother.
Online.
Did he leave the comment section?
Is that the same brother that had been in the content? Yeah.
He's Dr. Blast. That's my brother. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, he has, I think, some really interesting stories. Maybe I'll be able to get him on here. I know he had some mission. He served a mission, correct?
Yeah, he served a mission in the West Indies.
Yeah.
And he does have some interesting stories. And whether they're all accurate or not, I can't speak to that. But he's fun to listen to for sure.
When I hear you two going back and forth, it reminds me of me and my sister.
And remember, somebody on your page chastised me for treating him poorly, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's my brother. Don't worry about it."
Yeah. Sometimes people don't know that it's okay to
Yeah.
do that. My siblings would all say that I'm the crazy and off the wall, and they would probably say, you can't believe anything he says.
That's so funny because you are just so like straight laced, like you're, and I mean that.
Here's your brother. He says
there
they
he
are
is.
all
They're all
true.
true. All right. Okay. So you'll have to have him on. And
yes, I will
you can decide.
I will get Dr. Blast on, and we'll let the viewers decide how truthful he is. But I believe you, Doctor. Anyone with Doctor in their name like that, I believe you.
His initials are DR. DR. Those are his initials. So
okay, it's not that kind of doctor. Okay.
No. But thank you so much for having me on, Nathan. It was really it's awesome to spend time with you and get to know you a little bit and share stories.
Yes, and thank you so much. Where can people? You do have a podcast, right?
I do. I am on YouTube as What the 50. So it's like a podcast for women of a certain age who want to talk about things we want to talk about. I haven't recorded anything in over a year. That's my bad. I just got really sidetracked, but I'm going to pick that up again.
Say the name one more time.
It's What the 50.
What the 50?
My name is
Okay.
Yeah, and my name is Cindy Bell. So I think it's What the 50 with Cindy Bell.
Okay. Yeah, I looked it up today, and it looked like there was a couple other things trying to pop up too, but you were also right there. So.
Yeah, and I'm on TikTok too. I love TikTok. I think they're going to get rid of it. So. Anyway.
Well, I hope that we can do this again sometime. I have loved this opportunity and consider you a good friend, and hope you will me, and that we can continue this dialogue. And you're a lovely person, very well spoken, and it's been an honor to be with you here.
Thank you. So great to be on with you. I love what you're doing. I'm going to keep following you, and I'll be tuning into everything you do.
Awesome. Well, we have something planned for tomorrow night. It should be really fun with Masterpiece.
Yes.
And then I have a guest coming on next Tuesday that I think will be really fun. And then I think also Ruth's going to join me really soon. So I've got a lot of things coming up.
Awesome.
But thank you all once again. Thanks to our viewers. I'm going to go over here and hit my theme music, and that means I'm checking out. So take care, and we'll talk to y'all.
Okay.